Rejection usually marks the end of a life within the pack, a sentence of solitude and shame. For Serafina, being discarded by her fated mate wasn't just a heartbreak. It was a death sentence, disguised as a political tribute. The alpha of the Blackwood pack thought he was disposing of a weak link by sending her to the Obsidian Peak, the lair of a rumored monster. He didn't realize he was actually hand-delivering the queen who would eventually bring his entire pack to its knees. This is the story of how an unwanted sacrifice tamed the nightmare of the North. The rain in late November in the Pacific Northwest doesn't just wash things clean, it freezes them to the bone. That was the weather on the night Serafina's life effectively ended. It was November 14th, a date etched into the collective memory of the Blackwood pack, not for a celebration, but for the sheer cruelty displayed on the training grounds. Serafina stood ankle-deep in the mud. She was 21. Small for a wolf, with hair the color of wet straw and eyes that were constantly downcast. She was an omega, the lowest of the low in the hierarchy, responsible for laundry, dishes, and disappearing when important people entered the room. Across from her stood Alpha Kalen. Kalen was the golden boy of the werewolf community, 6'4", sculpted like a statue, and arrogant enough to believe the sun rose only to light his path. He had taken over the alpha position 3 months prior, after his father passed away from a sudden heart attack. The pack expected him to find a Luna, a strong female to help him secure the borders against the encroaching rogue threats. When the mating bond had snapped into place 10 minutes ago, Kalen hadn't looked at Serafina with love. He had looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Say it," Serafina whispered, her voice shaking against the drumming of the rain. "Just say it, Kalen." The crowd of pack members watching formed a tight circle. Among them stood Lila, the beta's daughter, tall, brunette, and viciously beautiful. She was smirking, holding an umbrella over her head, while Serafina soaked. Kalen stepped forward, his heavy boots squelching in the mud. He didn't offer Serafina a coat. He didn't offer a hand. "I, Alpha Kalen of the Blackwood pack," he boomed, his voice using the alpha command that forced every wolf to listen. "Reject you, Serafina. You are weak. You are wolfless. You are an embarrassment to the bloodline." The pain of a rejection is often described as a physical blow, like a hot knife, severing the soul. Serafina gasped, clutching her chest, falling to her knees in the slurry. The bond, which had been a warm thread only moments ago, shattered. "I accept your rejection," she choked out, as tradition demanded. If she didn't accept, the pain would eventually drive her mad. Kalen turned his back on her immediately, walking toward Lila. He grabbed the beta female by the waist and kissed her violently in front of the gathered crowd. "Lila will be your Luna," he announced, "a wolf worthy of the title." The pack cheered. They actually cheered. It was a mob mentality. Nobody wanted to side with the rejected Omega and risk the new Alpha's wrath. But the drama was far from over. As Kalen basked in the adoration of his pack, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled onto the training grounds, crushing the grass. It wasn't a pack car. It bore no license plates. The cheering died instantly. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out. He was human, but he smelled of something ancient and terrifying. This was Elias, the chamberlain to the Lycan king. Kalen's posture stiffened. "We weren't expecting a collection until the winter solstice." Elias adjusted his glasses, looking at the muddy scene with disdain. "King Domeric grows impatient. The tribute is due. One wolf from the Blackwood pack to serve in the Obsidian Peak. A servant. Or..." Elias looked at the shivering Serafina on the ground. "Meat. The king does not specify. The deal was an old one. The Lycan king, Domeric, ruled all wolves. He was a recluse, living high in the mountains. Rumors said he was a beast who had lost his human mind, a creature of pure violence who consumed wolves that displeased him. Packs sent tributes, usually criminals or the elderly, to serve him, and those wolves were never seen again." Kalen looked at Elias, then down at Serafina. A cruel smile touched his lips. He could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He could pay the tax and get rid of the ex-mate, who was a living reminder of his flawed biology. "We have a volunteer," Kalen said, pointing a finger at Serafina. "She is young. She is available." The pack gasped. Sending an Omega was one thing. Sending a rejected mate, mere minutes after the bond was severed, was a level of heartlessness that even the Blackwood wolves weren't prepared for. "No," Serafina whispered, looking up. "Kaelin, please, he'll kill me." "Then die knowing you finally served your pack," Kaelin hissed, leaning down so only she could hear. "You are a stain on my legacy, Serafina. Go to the monster. Maybe he'll find a use for you that I couldn't." Elias, the Chamberlain, looked between the arrogant Alpha and the broken girl. His expression was unreadable. "Very well," Elias said. "Get in the car, girl. We do not wait." Serafina didn't pack a bag. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, because there was no one to say goodbye to. She climbed into the back of the black SUV, muddy and shivering, as Kaelin wrapped his arm around Lila and watched her be driven away to her execution. The drive took 6 hours. They left the suburbs of Seattle and headed deep into the Cascades, driving past the point where the GPS stopped working and the paved roads turned to treacherous gravel switchbacks. The silence in the car was suffocating. Serafina sat on the expensive leather seats, trying to hover so her mud-caked jeans didn't ruin the interior, though she knew it didn't matter. She was dead anyway. "There are tissues in the console," Elias said from the front passenger seat. He didn't turn around. "I'm not crying," Serafina lied. Her voice was hoarse. "I didn't say you were crying. I said there are tissues. You are bleeding." Serafina touched her nose. The stress of the rejection and the overwhelming alpha command Kaelin had used had caused a nosebleed. She grabbed a tissue and wiped her face. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice small. "About the king? Does he eat the tributes?" The driver, a burly Lycan guard, snorted. Elias shot him a look. "King Domeric is particular," Elias said carefully. "He values silence. He values obedience. He despises weakness. You were sent because your alpha believes you are weak." "Are you?" Serafina looked out the window. The trees here were massive, ancient firs that blocked out the moonlight. "I survived 21 years in a pack that hated me. I survived being rejected by my soulmate an hour ago. I'm still breathing." Elias hummed, a sound that might have been approval. "We shall see." The car finally slowed as they approached a massive iron gate. It was woven with silver, lethal to regular wolves, but harmless to Lycans. The gates groaned open, revealing a fortress that looked like it had been carved directly out of the mountain's granite heart. The obsidian peak wasn't just a castle, it was a prison, disguised as a palace. Sharp spires pierced the clouds, and the entire structure seemed devoid of light, save for a few flickering amber windows near the top. They pulled into a courtyard. The air here was thin and frigid. Serafina stepped out, her wet clothes freezing instantly. "Follow me," Elias ordered. He led her through massive double doors into a grand foyer. The floor was black marble, polished to a mirror shine. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting ancient wars. Lycans tearing apart vampires, Lycans subduing rogue armies. It was a house of war. "You will be processed," Elias said. "You will bathe. You will be given a uniform. You are to avoid the West Wing at all costs. That is the king's domain. If you are found there, you will be removed. Permanently." Serafina nodded. She was led away by a silent maid, scrubbed raw in a hot bath that stung her rejection-bruised skin, and dressed in a simple grey maid's uniform. It was wool, warm, and high quality, far better than the rags she wore at Blackwood. She was assigned a small room in the servants' quarters. It was a cell, essentially, but it had a bed with a down comforter. For 3 days, she saw no one but the other staff. They were all older, scarred, people who kept their heads down. They didn't speak to her. They knew tributes didn't last long. On the 4th day, the trouble started. Serafina was assigned to dust the library. It was a massive, 2-story room filled with books older than her entire bloodline. She was on a ladder, reaching for a cobweb near the ceiling, when she felt it, a presence. It wasn't just a scent, though the smell was intoxicating, like burning pine and ozone before a storm. It was a pressure, a physical weight in the air that made her wolf whimper in the back of her mind. She froze. She knew she wasn't alone. Slowly, Serafina turned her head. Standing at the bottom of the ladder, leaning against a mahogany table, was a man. But calling him a man felt like an understatement. He was massive, easily nearing 7 feet tall. He wore loose black trousers and a white shirt unbuttoned at the top, revealing a chest scarred with silver burns. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, tied back loosely, but it was his eyes that froze her heart. They were gold, molten, glowing gold, with vertical slit pupils. This was King Domeric, the monster. He was staring up at her, his expression one of intense confusion and irritation. "Who?" he rumbled, his voice sounding like rocks grinding together. "Are you? And why do you smell like heartbreak and rain?" Serafina's hands shook. She gripped the ladder. I am the tribute, Your Majesty. From the Blackwood pack." Domeric narrowed his eyes. He sniffed the air again, a predatory inhale. "Blackwood? Kaelin's pack," he scoffed, a dark, dangerous sound. "He insults me. He sends me a broken thing, a rejected mate." He walked closer to the ladder. The sheer power radiating off him made Serafina dizzy. "Get down," he commanded. Serafina scrambled down the ladder, her legs giving out as she hit the floor. She fell into a bow, forehead to the marble. "Please, Your Majesty. I work hard. I won't disturb you. I stay in the shadows." "Stand up," Domeric barked. She stood, trembling, keeping her eyes on his boots. Domeric reached out, one large hand gripping her chin. His skin was scorching hot. He forced her head up. For the first time, she looked directly into the eyes of the Lycan king. There was no madness there, as the rumors claimed. There was only an ancient, weary intelligence and a simmering rage. He studied her face, looking for something. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, his touch surprisingly gentle for a monster. "You are not just a wolf," he murmured, almost to himself. "What are you?" Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Elias burst in, looking terrified. "My king!" The perimeter alarms. "Rogues are testing the southern fence." Domeric's eyes snapped away from Serafina. The gold in his irises flared, consuming the white. He released her chin, his demeanor shifting instantly from curious observer to lethal predator. "Stay here," Domeric growled at Serafina. "If you move from this room, I will hunt you myself." He turned and vanished in a blur of speed that the human eye couldn't track. Serafina was left standing in the silent library, her skin still burning where the monster had touched her. He hadn't killed her, he had touched her, and for the first time since Kaelin had broken her heart, the cold ache in her chest felt different. It wasn't healed, but it had been noticed. Serafina looked at the door. Kaelin had sent her here to die. But as she touched her own chin, realizing the King of Lycans had looked at her with curiosity rather than hunger, she realized something dangerous. She didn't want to run. She wanted to know why the king's touch felt like an antidote to her pain. Serafina waited in the library for 4 hours. The sun had long since dipped behind the jagged peaks of the mountains, plunging the room into shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe. She was terrified to move, remembering the lethal promise in King Domeric's eyes. "If you move, I will hunt you." Outside, the sounds of battle had faded quickly, replaced by the howling wind. But the silence inside the castle was heavier. It was the silence of a tomb. Around midnight, the double doors groaned open. Serafina, who had curled up in a tight ball at the base of the mahogany table, scrambled to her feet. She expected Elias, or perhaps guards coming to drag her to a dungeon. Instead, a massive shape stumbled into the room. It was Domeric. But he was not the composed, arrogant king who had interrogated her earlier. He was shirtless now, his chest heaving, covered in a mixture of red blood and a thick, black ichor that smelled of rot. His claws were extended, gouging deep grooves into the doorframe as he leaned against it for support. "Get out," he snarled, his voice a wet, guttural sound. His eyes were no longer just gold. They were bleeding into a chaotic black, the pupil dilated so wide it swallowed the iris. Serafina took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your Majesty, you're hurt." "I said, get out!" Domeric roared, pushing himself off the doorframe. He took 2 steps and collapsed to his knees, shattering a marble tile with the impact. He gripped his head in his hands, growling in agony. The noise. "Stop the noise." Elias appeared in the doorway behind him, looking pale and helpless. He held a syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid, but he was terrified to get close. "He's in the throes of the sickness," Elias whispered frantically to Serafina. "The rogue blood, it was tainted with silver nitrate and wolfsbane. It triggers the feral state. Girl, move away, or he will tear you apart." Serafina looked at the chamberlain, then back at the king writhing on the floor. Every instinct she had as a wolf screamed at her to run. He was a predator, huge and out of control. But as she watched him, she saw something else. She saw the way he clawed at his own temples, trying to rip out a pain that was internal. It was the same way she had felt standing in the mud when Kaelan rejected her. It was the feeling of being utterly, devastatingly alone in the dark. She didn't run. She walked forward. "Are you insane?" Elias hissed. "Stop." Serafina ignored him. She knelt on the floor in front of the kneeling giant. Domeric was panting, his breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged the cold air. The smell of the black poison on him was acrid, burning her nose. "Domeric," she said softly. She didn't use his title. The king's head snapped up. A low, rumbling growl vibrated deep in his chest, a sound that shook the floorboards. He looked ready to strike, his hand raised, claws gleaming like obsidian knives. Serafina didn't flinch. She slowly raised her hand and placed it on his knee. "It's quiet here," she whispered. "Listen to the rain. Just the rain." Domeric froze. His chest heaved, his eyes locking onto hers. For Serafina, the moment her skin touched his, a jolt of electricity arced through her body. It wasn't the violent snap of the mating bond she had felt with Kaelan. That bond had been demanding, possessive. This was different. This felt like an anchor dropping into the sea. It felt heavy, grounding, and ancient. Domeric blinked. The blackness in his eyes began to recede, revealing the molten gold underneath. The feral tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. "You," he rasped, staring at her hand on his knee. "You are cold." "I know," she said. "I've been cold for a long time." Domeric let out a long, shuddering breath. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against Serafina's shoulder. It was a position of absolute vulnerability. The king of Lycans, the monster of the north, was resting his head on the shoulder of a rejected Omega. Elias, watching from the door, dropped the syringe. His mouth hung open. "The voices," Domeric mumbled into her uniform, his voice thick with exhaustion. "They stopped." "Why did they stop?" "I don't know," Serafina murmured, instinctively raising a hand to stroke the back of his hair. It was soft, despite the wildness of his appearance. "Just sleep," and he did. Right there on the library floor, amidst the dust and the scent of old paper, King Domeric fell into a deep, comatose sleep, his heavy weight pinning Serafina to the ground. She couldn't move, and she didn't want to. For the first time since she arrived at Obsidian Peak, the crushing fear in her gut evaporated. She realized then that Kaelan was wrong. She wasn't wolfless. She wasn't weak, because she was currently the only thing holding the Lycan king together. The next morning, the dynamic in the castle shifted violently. Serafina was no longer invisible. When she woke up stiff and sore, having been carried back to her room by Elias after the king finally released his grip, she found a new uniform waiting for her. It wasn't the grey wool of a maid. It was black silk, embroidered with the silver crest of the royal house. "You have been reassigned," Elias told her at breakfast. He looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and awe. "You are no longer on cleaning duty. You are to be the king's attendant." "What does that mean?" Serafina asked, picking at the high-quality toast she'd been served. "It means you stay within 20 feet of him, at all times," Elias said gravely. "Last night was the first time King Domeric has slept more than an hour in 5 years. Whatever you are, whatever magic you carry, he needs it. But a promotion in a court of wolves is never a blessing. It's a target on your back." By noon, Serafina met the real power behind the throne and her new nightmare. She was standing in the solarium, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that thrived despite the snow outside, waiting for Domeric to finish a war council meeting. The doors opened, but it wasn't Domeric who walked in. It was a woman. She was tall, statuesque, with hair like spun silver and eyes of ice blue. She moved with the lethal grace of a warrior. This was Lady Soraya, the commander of the Royal Guard and the daughter of the Northern Alpha. She walked straight up to Serafina, looking her up and down with sneering disdain. "So," Soraya said, her voice smooth and cold, "this is the little pet everyone is whispering about. The Blackwood Reject." Serafina straightened her spine. "My name is Serafina." "I didn't ask for your name, Omega." Soraya spat the word like a curse. She circled Serafina, sniffing the air. "You smell like him. You smell like the king." Soraya stopped in front of her, her face twisting into a mask of jealousy. It was an open secret in the castle that Soraya intended to be Domeric's queen. She was strong, pure-blooded, and ruthless, everything a Lycan queen should be. And here was this scrawny, broken girl from the south, smelling of the king's scent. "He pity kept you," Soraya hissed. "Do not mistake his charity for affection. Domeric breaks things. That is his nature. And when he breaks you, I'll be the one sweeping up the pieces." "I've already been broken, Lady Soraya," Serafina said quietly, meeting the woman's gaze. "There's not much left for you or him to destroy." Soraya's eyes narrowed. She didn't like the lack of fear. She reached out, her hand glowing with a faint, repressive alpha energy, and shoved Serafina backward. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was calculated. Serafina stumbled back, her heel catching on a stone planter. She fell into a bed of vibrant purple flowers. As soon as her skin touched the leaves, a searing pain shot through her arm. It felt like acid. She gasped, scrambling out of the planter, clutching her forearm. Red welts were rising instantly on her skin. "Oh, clumsy," Soraya smirked. "Careful, that's nightshade ivy. It's toxic to wolves. It slows the healing. Leave a nasty scar." Serafina bit her lip to keep from crying out. The pain was blinding, throbbing in time with her heartbeat. "What is the meaning of this?" The voice boomed from the doorway. King Domeric stood there, flanked by 2 guards. He looked rested for the first time in years, his gold eyes clear and sharp. But as his gaze landed on Serafina, clutching her burning arm, the clarity vanished, replaced by a storm. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Soraya immediately bowed, flashing a charming, innocent smile. "My king," Soraya purred. The girl was clumsy. She fell into the ivy. "I was just about to call a healer." Domeric ignored Soraya completely. He reached Serafina, grabbing her uninjured arm to steady her. He looked at the angry red welts on her skin. A low growl started in his chest, vibrating through Serafina's bones. "Did you fall?" Domeric asked Serafina, his eyes boring into hers. Serafina looked at Soraya. The commander's eyes were daring her to snitch, promising retribution if she did. Serafina hesitated. She was used to taking the blame. It was the Omega way. "I lost my footing, Your Majesty." Domeric's grip on her tightened. He looked at the distance between where she had been standing and the planter. He looked at the smirk Soraya was trying to hide. He turned to Soraya. "You are the commander of my guard," Domeric said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your duty is to identify threats. Tell me, Soraya, since when is an unarmed Omega a threat that requires physical force?" Soraya's smile faltered. "I didn't. I was merely—" "I smell her fear," Domeric roared, the sound shattering a glass pane in the ceiling. Snow began to drift down into the warm room. "And I smell your aggression. If you touch her again, Soraya, I will forget your father's rank, and I will forget your service. Do you understand?" Soraya paled, her arrogance stripped away by the sheer magnitude of the king's power. She bowed low, trembling. "Yes, my king, get out." Soraya fled. Domeric turned back to Serafina. The rage in his eyes cooled as he looked at her arm. He did something then that shocked her more than his anger. He lifted her wrist to his mouth. "This will sting," he murmured. He licked the welts. Lycan saliva was known to have potent healing properties, far stronger than a regular wolf's. As his tongue soothed the angry burns, the pain vanished instantly, replaced by a cool numbness. Serafina watched, mesmerized, as the king of the north tended to her wounds with a tenderness that defied his reputation. When he finished, the redness was gone. He didn't let go of her hand. "Why did you lie?" he asked, his thumb tracing her pulse point. "I know she pushed you." "I am used to fighting my own battles," Serafina whispered. "You are in my house now," Domeric said, his voice rough. "You fight no battles alone." "And Serafina?" "Yes?" "Stop calling yourself broken," he said, looking at the scar where Kaelin's mark should have been. "You are not broken. You are being forged. There is a difference." He pulled her closer, sniffing her hair, inhaling the scent that had put him to sleep the night before. "Tonight," he said, "we are going to the crypts. There is something you need to see, something that explains why Elias brought you here." "I thought I was just a tribute," she said. Domeric shook his head. "Elias didn't pick you at random, little wolf. He picked you because your bloodline has been dead for 200 years. Or so we thought. The crypts beneath the obsidian peak were not a place for the living. The air was stagnant, heavy with the metallic tang of silver and the dust of crushed bones. Domeric led Serafina down a spiraling staircase that seemed to have no end. his large hand encompassing hers, providing a tether to reality in the oppressive darkness. They passed rows of sarcophagi, each bearing the likeness of a past Lycan king. But Domeric didn't stop at the warriors. He walked until the stone floor turned to raw earth, deep in the mountain's root. He stopped before a solitary statue carved from white marble, a stark contrast to the black granite of the castle above. The statue depicted a woman. She was small, delicate, her hands raised as if in prayer or offering. Serafina gasped. The face on the statue was not identical to hers, but the resemblance was undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the jaw, it was like looking at a grandmother she had never known. "This is Queen Arianel," Domeric said, his voice echoing in the silence. "She was the only one who could ever control the madness of the first Lycan king. History calls her a sorceress. We know the truth. She was a spirit walker. A silver blood." Serafina stared at the statue. "I don't understand. I'm an Omega. I have no gifts. I can't even shift properly. My wolf is quiet." "Your wolf isn't quiet, Serafina. She is dormant because she is too powerful for a regular pack to sustain," Domeric explained, turning to face her. "The silver bloodline was thought to be extinct. Kaelin and his father, they didn't know what they had. They saw your inability to submit to their petty alpha commands as weakness. They didn't realize you couldn't submit because you were born to rule." He stepped closer, the gold in his eyes swirling. "Why do you think the sickness stopped when you touched me? Why do you think Elias found you? Your blood doesn't just carry DNA, it carries peace. You are the only creature on this earth capable of anchoring a Lycan soul." Serafina looked at her hands, the hands that had scrubbed floors and washed dishes for years. "So, I was never broken?" "No," Domeric vowed, lifting her hand to his chest, placing it directly over his beating heart. "You were a queen in exile. And Kaelin, that fool gave away the most valuable treasure in the werewolf world because he wanted a soldier instead of a savior." The moment was shattered by the vibrating hum of Domeric's phone. He ignored it at first, but it persisted. He pulled it out, his expression hardening into a snarl. "Speak," he answered. Serafina watched the king's face transform from tenderness to icy rage. "He dares?" Domeric whispered. "Let him come. Open the main gates." He hung up and looked at Serafina. "It seems your former alpha has realized his mistake. Kaelin is at the gates. He claims he made an administrative error. He wants you back." A cold spike of fear pierced Serafina's gut. You won't send me back." Domeric laughed, a dark, terrifying sound that promised violence. "Send you back? Serafina, I am going to make him watch as you take your place at my side. Come, it is time the Blackwood Pack learned what true power looks like." The Great Hall of Obsidian Peak was a cavernous space designed to intimidate, and it was working. Alpha Kaelin stood in the center of the room, flanked by his beta, Lila, and a dozen of his best warriors. They looked uncomfortable. The air here was thin, and the sheer amount of alpha energy radiating from the walls was making their wolves anxious. Kaelin, however, masked his fear with arrogance. He paced the floor, checking his watch. "This is ridiculous," Lila hissed, adjusting her fur coat. "We rejected her. She's property of the crown now. Why are we here, Kaelin?" "Because," Kaelin muttered, "spies tell me she's not scrubbing floors. They say she's living in the royal wing. If Domeric finds out she has the silver blood, he becomes invincible. We cannot let the Lycans gain that advantage. We get her back, or we kill her." The heavy oak doors swung open. Domeric did not walk in. He stormed in, a hurricane of black and gold. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her head held high, was Serafina. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that clung to her frame, her hair braided with silver threads. She didn't look like the muddy, shivering girl they had thrown away a week ago. She looked ethereal. Kaelin's jaw dropped. He actually took a step forward, his eyes raking over her. The mating bond he had severed was gone, but the biological pull was still there, now amplified by her confidence. "King Domeric," Kaelin said, forcing a bow. "We have come to correct a mistake. It seems our records were flawed. Serafina was not meant for tribute. She is, required back at Blackwood." Domeric sat on his throne, pulling Serafina down to sit on the armrest beside him. It was a massive breach of protocol, a statement of possession so loud it was deafening. "Required?" Domeric mused, drumming his fingers on the stone. You rejected her, Kaelin, in front of your whole pack. You called her waste. A lover's quarrel. Kaelin lied smoothly, flashing a smile that used to make Serafina weak. He looked directly at her. Serafina, baby, come home. You don't belong with these monsters. Lila was just a distraction. I was angry. I want you back. Serafina looked at Kaelin. She looked at the man she had loved since she was 16, and she felt nothing. No pain, no longing, just pity. I am home, Kaelin, Serafina said, her voice clear and steady. You belong to the Blackwood, Kaelin snapped, his facade slipping. You are an Omega. You do as you are told. She is not an Omega, Domeric roared, the sound shaking dust from the rafters. She is the White Wolf, and she is my mate. The declaration hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Kaelin's face went pale. Mate? You claimed a reject? I claimed a queen, Domeric snarled. Suddenly, the lights in the hall flickered and died. A high-pitched alarm began to scream. The barrier, Elias shouted from the balcony. The perimeter barrier is down. Rogues! Hundreds of them. Kaelin drew a hidden silver knife. Now, it was a setup. Kaelin hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to distract. Lila lunged for Serafina, her claws extending. At the same time, the windows shattered as rogue wolves, hired mercenaries, poured into the hall. Domeric moved faster than thought. He intercepted Lila, backhanding her across the room with bone-crushing force. But he was immediately swarmed by 10 rogues, injecting him with darts. Domeric! Serafina screamed. Run! He bellowed, his eyes bleeding into that feral black again as the poison hit his system. Serafina, run! But the exit was blocked. Soraya, the jealous commander, stood by the door, holding the remote that had lowered the barriers. She smiled at Serafina. I told you, Omega. I'd be the one sweeping up the pieces. The hall descended into chaos. The Blackwood wolves turned on the king's guard. Kaelin, seeing Domeric stumbling under the influence of the wolfsbane darts, laughed. He raised his knife, aiming for the king's exposed back. Serafina saw it all. She saw the man who had rejected her, about to kill the man who had saved her. Something inside her snapped. The dormant wolf Domeric had spoken of didn't just wake up. It exploded. The tension in the great hall was a physical weight, pressing down on the lungs of every wolf present. The air, usually crisp and cold at this altitude, had become stiflingly hot, charged with the crackling energy of aggression. Alpha Kaelin stood in the center of the obsidian floor, his posture feigning confidence, though the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. Behind him, Lila shifted on her heels, her eyes darting around the cavernous room, clearly intimidated by the dark grandeur of the Lycan king's court. You speak of requirements, Domeric said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to emanate from the stone walls themselves. He remained seated on his throne, his posture relaxed, almost bored, but his hand rested heavily on Serafina's arm, a clear, possessive claim. You speak of administrative errors. Do you take me for a fool, Kaelin? Or do you simply lack the intelligence to understand where you are standing? Kaelin straightened his tie, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. King Domeric, please, we are all practical males here. The girl is flawed. She was rejected for a reason, but she carries the Blackwood bloodline. It is a matter of pack sovereignty. We cannot leave a member of our pack in the hands of strangers. He turned his gaze to Serafina. His eyes softened, adopting a look of practiced remorse that Serafina knew all too well. It was the same look he used when he broke promises, the same look he used to manipulate her for years. Serafina, Kaelin pleaded, stepping forward. Look at you, dressed up like a doll in a castle of nightmares. You're scared. I can smell it. Come home. Lila was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. I was grieving my father. I wasn't thinking clearly. The pack needs you. I need you. For a moment, silence hung suspended in the hall. Serafina looked at the man who had been the center of her universe for so long. She looked at his handsome face, the strong jaw, the broad shoulders, and then she looked deeper. She saw the cruelty in the set of his mouth, the greed in his eyes, the utter lack of soul. She felt the warmth of Domeric's hand on her arm, a steady, burning anchor. You don't need me, Kaelin, Serafina said, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing slightly in the vast chamber. You need the tribute requirement filled. Or perhaps, you've heard the rumors? You've heard that I am not just a floor-scrubbing Omega? Kaelin's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're talking about. Come here, now. That is an Alpha command. The air shimmered. An Alpha command was a psychic compulsion. It should have forced Serafina to her knees. She felt the pressure of it, like a heavy hand pushing on her skull, trying to force submission. She took a breath, drew on the strange cold fire that had been igniting in her blood since she arrived at the peak, and simply pushed it aside. She remained seated. Kaelin stumbled back as if he'd been slapped. How? She does not obey you, Domeric growled, slowly rising from the throne. He stood to his full height, dwarfing the Blackwood Alpha. Because she is not yours. She is not an Omega. She is the White Wolf, and she is my mate. The declaration hit the room like a thunderclap. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Kaelin went pale, his gaze flicking between Domeric and Serafina in horror. Mate? Kaelin choked out. Impossible. She has no wolf. She is defective. She is a queen, Domeric corrected, his golden eyes flaring. And you have trespassed in her domain. Domeric took a step down from the dais, his intent clearly lethal. I was going to be merciful, Kaelin. I was going to let you leave with your life. But you tried to command my mate in my own hall. For that, I will tear your throat out. But before Domeric could take another step, the world fractured. A high-pitched, electronic screech pierced the air, agonizing to sensitive wolf ears. Simultaneously, the heavy magical wards that protected the castle wards that had held for centuries shattered with a sound like breaking glass. The massive chandeliers overhead flickered and died, plunging the hall into a gloom, illuminated only by the winter moonlight streaming through the high windows. The barrier! Elias shouted from the upper balcony, panic edging his voice. The southern grid is down. We have a breach. Now! Kaelin screamed, his demeanor shifting instantly from terrified diplomat to vicious attacker. He didn't attack Domeric, though. He dropped to the floor as the stained glass windows along the eastern wall exploded inward. Shards of colored glass rained down like lethal confetti as dark shapes poured into the hall. Rogues, mercenaries, wolves with matted fur and the scent of madness, hired blades who cared for nothing but coin and blood. There were dozens of them. Treason! Domeric roared. He moved with a speed that blurred the air, intercepting a rogue that lunged for Serafina. He caught the wolf in mid-air, snapping its neck with a sickening crunch and throwing the body aside. Get behind me, Domeric ordered Serafina, his claws extending, his human face contorting into the partial shift of battle fangs lengthening, eyes turning entirely black. But this was not a random attack. It was an assassination. From the shadows of the pillars, more figures emerged. They held sleek, black rifles. Domeric! Look out! Serafina screamed. Twip, twip, twip. The sound of compressed air firing darts was barely audible over the snarling of the rogues. Domeric roared in fury, spinning to face the gunman, but he was a large target. 3 darts struck him, 1 in the neck, 2 in the chest. He ripped them out instantly, but the damage was done. Wolfsbane, Domeric grunted, stumbling. Mixed with mercury. His legs gave out. The Lycan king, the strongest predator in the north, crashed to one knee. The poison was a specialized cocktail, designed to incapacitate a god. No! Serafina scrambled off the dais, rushing to him. She grabbed his shoulders, trying to haul him up. Domeric, please, get up, run. Domeric wheezed, black veins already spiderwebbing up his neck from the puncture wounds. He shoved her away, his strength fading. Serafina, run to the crypts. I'm not leaving you, she cried. A slow, mocking applause echoed from the main doors. Soraya walked in. The commander of the royal guard, the woman sworn to protect the king, was holstering a tranquilizer pistol. She stepped over the body of a loyal guard, a cruel smile playing on her lips. So tragic, Soraya purred, signaling for the rogues to hold back. The king falls, defending his little pet. It's almost romantic, in a pathetic sort of way. You, Serafina breathed, staring at the woman. You lowered the barriers. I did, Soraya admitted, stopping a few feet away. She looked down at Domeric, who was snarling, fighting to keep his eyes open, his body paralyzed by the toxins. He rejected me, you know. For years, I offered him strength. I offered him an alliance that would rule the continent. And he chose. Brooding. Silence. And then you. She spat the word. A southern weakling. Kalen emerged from where he had been cowering. He saw the king incapacitated, and his confidence returned tenfold. He walked over to Domeric and kicked the Lycan king in the ribs. Domeric groaned, unable to defend himself. "Stop it!" Seraphina lunged at Kalen, but Lila was faster. The beta female grabbed Seraphina by the hair, yanking her back and throwing her to the stone floor. "Stay down, trash," Lila hissed. Kalen laughed, adjusting his cuffs. "Well done, Soraya. The Blackwood Pack thanks you. We will take the girl. You can have the castle." "As agreed," Soraya nodded. "Kill the king. Make it look like the rogues did it." Kalen drew a long, serrated silver knife from his belt. He looked at Domeric, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of killing a superior rival. "Goodbye, Your Majesty," Kalen sneered. "Don't worry about Seraphina. I'll make sure she learns her place in the kennels." Seraphina lay on the cold stone, watching the man she once loved raise a blade to murder the man she now loved. She looked at Domeric. His black eyes met hers. Even through the paralysis, even through the agony of the poison, he wasn't looking at the knife. He was looking at her. He was worried about her. "You are not broken," he had told her. "You are being forged." Something inside Seraphina snapped. It wasn't a mental decision. It was biological. It was spiritual. Deep in her chest, the place where her wolf had been silent for 21 years, a barrier crumbled. It didn't break because of fear. It broke because of rage. Pure, white-hot, protective rage. The air in the great hall suddenly dropped 20 degrees. Frost raced across the floor, cracking the stone. Kalen hesitated, the knife hovering inches from Domeric's chest. He shivered. "What is that?" A low hum began to vibrate through the room. It sounded like a choir, like 1,000 voices whispering in an ancient tongue. Seraphina stood up. Lila tried to grab her again. I said, "Stay D. Kneel." The word didn't come from Seraphina's vocal cords. It erupted from her very existence. It was a shockwave of power so dense it was visible, a ripple of white distortion that blasted outward. Lila didn't just fall, she was flattened. The force slammed her into the ground so hard the stone beneath her pulverized. Kalen was thrown backward, the knife flying from his hand. He skidded across the floor, crashing into Soraya. The rogues, sensing an apex predator far beyond their comprehension, began to whine, covering their ears, cowering against the walls. Seraphina opened her eyes. They were no longer human. They were burning orbs of celestial white light, devoid of pupil or iris. Her hair floated around her as if she were underwater, glowing with a faint, silvery halo. She didn't shift into a wolf. She didn't need to. The spirit walker, the silver blood, was not bound by the physical limitations of fur and claw. She was the wolf incarnate. She took a step toward Domeric. The frost paved a path for her. She knelt beside him, ignoring the terrified gasps of her enemies. Domeric was struggling to breathe, the poison stopping his heart. "Seraphina," he whispered, his voice barely a sound. "Shh," she soothed, her voice echoing with that dual-tone harmonic. "I am here." She placed her hands on his chest, directly over the puncture wounds. White light poured from her palms like liquid fire. It flowed into Domeric's chest, chasing the black veins. Where the light touched, the poison evaporated into harmless steam. The wounds knit together in seconds. The blackness in Domeric's eyes receded, replaced by his natural, vibrant gold. He gasped, arching his back as the vitality flooded him. He was healed, instantly. Seraphina stood up and turned to face the room. Domeric stood with her, his power returning, but he didn't attack. He stood slightly behind her, recognizing that this was her moment. This was her hunt. Seraphina looked at Soraya. "You betrayed your blood," Seraphina said. The temperature dropped further. "You allowed vermin into the House of Kings." Soraya, trembling, tried to raise her gun. "What? What are you?" Seraphina merely flicked her wrist. An invisible force ripped the gun from Soraya's hand and crushed it into a ball of metal in midair. With another gesture, Seraphina blasted Soraya backward, pinning her against the far wall, suspended 5 feet off the ground by unseen hands. "I am the judgment you forgot to fear," Seraphina stated. She turned her glowing gaze to Kalen. The Alpha of Blackwood was crawling backward, trying to reach the door. "Seraphina, baby, wait, we can talk. I didn't mean it." Seraphina walked toward him. She moved with a predatory grace that was terrifying to behold. You called me weak, Kaelin. For years, you let the pack torment me. You rejected me in the rain and threw me to a monster to die. She stopped standing over him. Kaelin looked up, tears streaming down his face. Please, I am an alpha. You are a boy playing with shadows, she said. She reached out and grabbed him by the throat. She lifted him into the air with one hand, a physical feat impossible for an Omega. Domeric, Seraphina said, not looking away from Kaelin. What is the penalty for attempted regicide? Death, Domeric answered, his voice grim. And what is the penalty for an alpha who abandons his duty? Exile, Domeric said. Seraphina tightened her grip. Kaelin clawed at her hand, his legs kicking uselessly. Death is too easy for you, Seraphina whispered, her glowing eyes boring into his soul. You crave power? You crave status? Then you shall have neither. She closed her eyes and channeled the silver blood magic. She forced it into Kaelin's body, hunting for his wolf. When she found it, that spark of spiritual energy that made him a werewolf, she grabbed it, and she tore it out. Kaelin screamed a sound of absolute, spiritual agony. It wasn't physical pain, it was the sensation of losing a limb, of losing half his soul. Seraphina dropped him. He crumpled to the floor, sobbing, clutching his chest. He looked smaller, frailer. I have severed your wolf, Seraphina announced, her voice ringing through the hall. You are human now, Kaelin. You are no alpha. You are no wolf. You are nothing. She looked at the cowering rogues. Leave. Tell the world what lives on Obsidian Peak. Tell them the white wolf has returned. The rogues didn't need to be told twice. They fled, scrambling over broken glass to escape the presence of the demigod in the hall. Lila, weeping on the floor, crawled toward Kaelin, but she looked at him with disgust now that he was wolfless. Guards, Domeric barked, as his loyal men finally burst into the room, having secured the perimeter. Take Soraya to the dungeon. She awaits trial. Throw Kaelin and Lila out the main gate. If they are found within 10 miles of the mountain by sunrise, hunt them. As Kaelin was dragged away, screaming Seraphina's name, the white glow finally began to fade from her eyes. The adrenaline crashed. The room stopped spinning. Seraphina swayed, her knees buckling. Domeric caught her. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deep, shuddering breaths. You stayed, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You could have run. You fought for me. Seraphina rested her head on his shoulder, her hand curling into his shirt. I told you, Domeric. I don't run anymore. He pulled back to look at her. There was awe in his face, a reverence that no king had ever shown a subject. He reached up and wiped a smudge of dust from her cheek. My queen, he murmured. My savior. He kissed her then. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a searing confirmation of survival, a promise forged in blood and magic. In the ruin of the great hall, amidst shattered glass and the smell of ozone, the bond between them solidified into something unbreakable. The winter had passed, giving way to a tentative, blooming spring in the mountains. The Obsidian Peak was no longer the silent tomb it had been. It was alive. Delegates from packs all over the continent filled the courtyards. They came to pay tribute, yes, but mostly they came to see her. The legend of the White Wolf had spread like wildfire. The Omega who became a queen, the spirit walker who stripped an alpha of his wolf. Seraphina stood on the high balcony, looking out over the valley. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scent of pine. She wore white robes embroidered with silver thread, a crown of woven moon vines resting on her platinum hair. She wasn't alone. Domeric stepped up behind her, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, resting his chin on the top of her head. He was no longer the beast of the north. He was a king at peace. The council is waiting, Domeric murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. They want to know if we will accept the treaty with the southern packs. Let them wait a moment longer. Seraphina smiled, leaning back into him. I'm enjoying the view. Thinking about the past? He asked softly. No, Seraphina said, watching a hawk circle the thermals above the tree line. I was thinking about the rain. The rain? The rain on the day Kaelin rejected me, she explained, turning in his arms to face him. She reached up, tracing the faint scars on his jaw. I hated it then. It felt like the sky was crying for me. But now, I'm grateful for it. Why? Domeric asked, his golden eyes searching hers. Because, she whispered, rising on her tiptoes to brush her lips against his. If I hadn't been washed away by the rain, I never would have found the strength to survive the snow, and I never would have found you. Domeric smiled a true, brilliant smile that transformed his face, and I would still be lost in the dark. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. Come, my queen, we have a world to rule. Together, they turned away from the cold memories of the past and stepped back into the warmth of the castle, ready to face a future that belonged entirely to them. And that is how Serafina went from an unwanted sacrifice to the most powerful queen in werewolf history. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the people who reject us are actually doing us the biggest favor of our lives by pushing us toward our true destiny. Kaelin lost everything because he valued status over soul, and Domeric gained everything because he saw value where others saw brokenness. If you were Serafina, would you have banished Kaelin, or would you have taken a darker revenge? Let me know your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, magic, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next episode of our werewolf romances. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.
Hi, my name is Mountain Confessions, the owner and manager of Mountain Confessions. After watching the video, the rejected Omega was sent as punishment, not knowing the Lycan King would fall for her. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling in this story was the way rejection slowly turned into unexpected connection and respect. It's interesting how someone who feels completely unwanted can still find strength in themselves, even before anyone else sees their value. That quiet change in confidence made the story feel more emotional than dramatic. Do you think the Lycan King truly understood her from the beginning, or did his feelings grow over time? And if you were in her place, would you have trusted someone after being hurt that deeply before? I think stories like this remind us that sometimes the opinions that hurt us most don't define who we become, even when it feels that way in the moment. If this story stayed on your mind after the video ended, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these emotional Alpha King stories, feel free to like or subscribe, only if you'd like to see more like this from us.